co-chair of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Bill Gates, says Nigeria has a low tax collection profile and stated that this situation poses a significant challenge to financing critical sections such as health and education. Speaking at a Pan-African Youth Dialogue on Nutrition in Abuja on Thursday, Gates emphasized the need for effective tax collection to ensure adequate funding for public services, essential public services. Gates also stressed that well-managed funding of health programs is crucial for citizens to trust the government's ability to deliver quality health care. Meanwhile, President Bola Tinubu on Friday rounded off his official engagements in China and reaffirmed his commitment to replicate China's infrastructure when he returns to Nigeria. Addressing members of Nigerians in diaspora organization in China and the Nigerian community at the China World Hotel, the president described his visit to the Asian country as very good and successful. He emphasized his efforts to strengthen cooperation in infrastructure, trade, finance, energy, green economy, and mining when he met with President Xi Jinping and Premier Li Keqiang, and during his participation at the 2024 summit of the Forum on China and Africa Cooperation, FOCAC. The president, however, cited the importance of discipline and commitment to national service, citing China's disciplined society as an example for Nigerians to follow. Following Nigeria's pledge, China's pledge of $50.7 billion in credit lines and investments to African countries, President Tinubu's trip to the summit in Beijing assumes added significance. How prepared is Nigeria to seize opportunities being presented by China's recent charm offensive in Africa through its Belt and Road Initiative? Chief Johnson Chukwu joins me now. He is founder and managing director of Cowrie Asset Management Company Limited. Good to have you here, Double Chief, High Chief Johnson Chukwu. It's been a while. Good to have you on this day live, this Sunday talk show.
Thank you for having me, Your Excellency.
Well, let's start with President Tinubu's trip to China. We're told that 5 MOUs were signed at the, bilateral level between Nigeria and China. A number of MOUs were also signed at the private sector level. MOUs were also signed at the level of, private sector involvement in that larger umbrella of state visit and also FOCAC, Forum for China-Africa Cooperation. Now, how significant is this? President Tinubu says, it was a very successful trip. But this is not the first time we will have Nigeria going to China. I keep saying. President Buhari was, hosted 2016, 2017. MOUs were signed. But nothing came out of those MOUs. Is there any guarantee that this will be different with President Tinubu?
Well, Dr. Herbert, let me start from the tail end of your question. Is there any guarantee that this will be different from the previous MOUs that we have signed? Well, I'm not in a position to say there's going to be a guarantee, but one thing we must also bear in mind is that we need to make our domestic economy attractive to investors. And that's the starting point. If we are still an economy that investors do not consider their first choice of investment as an investment destination, then MOUs, both bilateral and whatever form, the corporate MOUs between Nigerian entities and foreign entities will not move the needle. So the key thing is that the Chinese investors, the Chinese government must see value in investing in the Nigerian economy. Interestingly, we build a lot of potentials, but those potentials remain at the limit of potentials for decades. If you look at what's happening today, Chinese companies are going to invest in U.S. because the U.S. government has turned around their economy, reduced the energy costs, and given that they are a huge market in terms of consumption, they are now attractive. There's a reverse flow of investment from China to the U.S., unlike what we had in the past, where the Chinese were investing, I mean, the Americans were investing in China. The Chinese companies have invested massively in Mexico to be able to provide service the American market, given the common trade agreement between the two countries. Today, investors are flooding into Vietnam to invest because that country now presents a good investment opportunity or investment destination. So beyond the MOUs, the key thing is for us to come back home, fold our sleeves, and do the dirty, heavy lifting that we need to do to make this economy attractive. I think that's what can I guarantee that these MOUs will be stronger than, better than the paper on which they are signed.
Well, I mean, the Chinese are saying that they are interested in encouraging Chinese businesses to come to Nigeria. The Nigerian government is also very willing, at least the president told the premier and the president. The American example that you have cited, Americans are snubbing the Chinese over microprocessors, over telecommunications, over intellectual copyright. They are putting tariffs of up to 100% on EVs, electric vehicles coming from BYD and from China. And yet the Chinese want to go to China. Now we seem to have a problem here. What is the problem in terms of commitment to MOUs, in terms of consistency to MOUs? The president has gone to China against the background of a Chinese company seizing our presidential aircraft and having issues with Ogun State government. And yet other states in Nigeria are signing MOUs. What is the problem in terms of how we meet our own obligations?
Dr. Habati, I think there are two perspectives to it. One is adherence to contracts. The Nigerian government's tendency to ignore contracts. That's a different thing. I'm going to come back to that. But let me start by speaking on the fact that the U.S. government is doing everything to discourage their Chinese investors. And the Chinese companies and investors are struggling to enter the U.S. market. The U.S. economy is a $25 trillion economy. Today, China is about $18 trillion economy. So the size of the GDP of the U.S., the fact that the U.S. is the largest consumer market in the world, it is what is attracting the Chinese to want to do everything to get into the U.S. U.S. is also mindful of the fact that China's foray into the U.S. economy could compromise the U.S. security. And today, the U.S. is particularly fixated on maintaining, making sure that they do not lose their primus position in terms of being the strongest economy in the world, being the strongest military in the world to China. And that's why today the battlefield is being fought in the technological space. And China has advanced their technology to the extent that today they can reasonably rival the U.S. technology. And now back to the aspect of Nigeria's government. It is not just as it relates to foreign partners or foreign entities. The Nigerian government at different levels, start from the local government to the federal government, are reluctant or do not consider adherence to contracts as a critical component of engagement. If you have ever done any business with Nigeria, as a person, as an individual, and as a head of a corporate organization, for instance, Cowry has made a vow that we're not going to do anything with government that involves parting with value unless the government is ready to pay for that value ahead of us giving them value. Because when you do that, you realize that no government in Nigeria is willing to pay. They do not consider the sanctity of contracts. And that's obviously what they have taken beyond the shores of Nigeria in relating with foreign entities like the Chinese government. Unknown to them, that the Chinese and other foreign entities have stronger capacity to enforce those contracts than local operators like us. So the key thing we have to bear in mind is that in as much as the Nigerian government at different levels, state governments want to sign a contract with China or with other foreign entities, are we willing to abide by our own responsibility in those contracts? That is very key. You don't just expect that the other party will give what they have to give in a contract, and then on your own part, you just take whatever is available and you move on. And I think that has been the bane at different levels of governmental contract. If you go to those who do contract for government, they will tell you that, look, government is owing them, government does not care about time value of money, government does not care about the survival of corporate entities that have provided service at their own cost to government. And I think what we had, the case involving the Ogun State government that led to the seizure of federal government aircraft, it has to tend towards that, because if the government in Ogun State had abided by the terms of whatever contract they are signed with the Chinese entity, we wouldn't be at that cross.
Okay. One other thing, when President Tinubu was addressing the summit, in his capacity as chairman of ECOWAS, he said China's objectives in Africa align with the same objectives as that of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. And China promising additional $50 billion in terms of investment in African countries. He said, oh, the relationship is at a level of mutual trust, sovereignty and respect. Do you agree with those two assertions? Do we have mutual respect, sovereign interests, aligning between China and African countries, say, for example, Zambia, Djibouti, Kenya?
Okay, let me put it this way. When you talk of mutual respect, respect begets respect. First of all, you must make sure that you abide by your commitment with your counterparty for you to maintain your respect with that counterparty, including our personal relationship with our wives, our children, our friends, any other partner you're going to deal with. So some of the challenges we have with African countries is that they go in and sign into contract. They think this, what is coming from China is a free will or a free gift. China's foreign policy driven by economic considerations. We must bear that in mind. Whenever we're going into any contract, any engagement with China, we must also bear in mind what is the primary motive of China. It's about their economic interest. So if we also have similar economic interests to protect in Nigeria or Africa, and we go into a contract with China with both parties expecting to protect and further their economic interests, then it becomes mutual, because both parties are going to make sure that whatever agreement they enter into with China will protect their national interest, economic interest. So, but if you go into a contract and think that the other person is giving you a handout, whether that person has an economic interest in that contract, and then you receive whatever value that's passed on to you, and you don't keep to your own terms of the contract, then you're not going to have the mutual respect you expect, because when you default in payment of your obligations, the other party will not have any respect for you. And so we must bear that in mind. So for us as Africans, we must make sure that we have a very well-defined motive. We define our external policies, and is driven by economic consideration, which is what drove American expansion, is driving Chinese expansion, is currently driving even India, that is still largely focused internally. And you are looking at, if I'm going to go into this contract with this company or this country, what is the need for my people, as a nation, as a continent? Our interest is going to be furthered. Then once you have that, it becomes mutual. China wants to invest in Africa because they are interested in raw materials. They're interested in market. Today, African population about the size of Chinese population. China is about 1.409 billion. Africa is about 1.39 billion people. And so we're about the same size. So if China has another Africa fully developed that has a consumer market, it simply means it has replicated the population in Africa, and then it has a market size of 2.8 billion to supply to when it has its own population. So China is looking at, can we develop African markets to become a consumer market? And can we also extract raw materials from Africa? On African side, we should be asking ourselves, how do we get the Chinese to invest and provide employment for our people, upskill the skill level of our people, transfer technology to our people, so that we'll become self-sufficient in the near future. And if we don't have that defined, it then becomes not a mutual relationship and not a balanced relationship. It becomes a relationship that is obviously skewed in favor of China.
Well, while President Tinubu was in China, Bill Gates was visiting Nigeria under the umbrella of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. That foundation has spent maybe over $28 billion supporting Nigeria, polio, health, nutrition, and other programs in Africa, not just Nigeria alone. Now, when he was visiting, Mr. Bill Gates made the point that Nigeria's economy has stagnated in the last 14 years. He also made the additional point that tax to GDP ratio in Nigeria is too low, and that Nigerians have to pay more taxes, and their leaders should manage those taxes well. This is not the first time Mr. Bill Gates will comment on the Nigerian economy. When he was here in 2018, he made earth-shaking comments about how the Nigerian government was managing the economy. But this time, he's saying the economy has stagnated and that we have issues with taxation. What do you think?
Well, I think I agree completely with Mr. Bill Gates that our economy has stagnated over the past couple of years. We saw an economy that has grown at less than 2% in the past 10 years. So I think that is a clear stagnation, given that the population has been growing about 2.4%. We've seen an economy that has seen a deterioration in the standard of living, in the per capita GDP. So those are evidence of stagnation. But when it comes to the issue of tax revenue, which Mr. Bill Gates said that we need to increase the tax revenue, he also put a caveat that for people to trust the government to pay taxes, there must be a commitment on the part of the government to effectively use the tax revenue for the people. And that's where you have the huge gap between the contract that the civic contract that we have as citizens between us and the government, where the government expects you to pay your tax, but the government is not ready to abide by its own contractual obligation to provide you security, to provide you infrastructure, to provide you basic social amenities. So, and that weakens your resolve, your excitement in paying tax. That's one aspect of it we have to bear in mind. The second aspect you have to look at when you talk of tax revenue to GDP, which is obviously what Mr. Gates is looking at, is that the Nigerian government has what you may call unearned or passive income they get from the extractive industry that is not tied to tax, unlike what they have in America, where the oil exploration are in the hands of corporate organizations and individuals. So those corporate organizations and individuals who explore and extract oil pay tax as corporate entities. In Nigeria, the federal government basically enjoy the benefit, not the federal government, the three tiers of government enjoy the benefit of extractive industry, which account about 5% of the Nigerian economy in terms of GDP, but account for more than 90% of foreign exchange earnings. All those income come to the federal government. So in terms of structure of our economy is slightly different from the Western economies that are driven by private sector enterprises. That's second aspect. Third aspect is that our economy is still highly informal. When you have a high level of informality in the economy, it becomes difficult to tax those informal sectors of the economy. Unlike when you have the economy is highly formalized. If the economy is more formalized, it becomes easier for government to extract taxes from the citizens. And the fourth factor is that in terms of standard of living, in terms of cost of living in the country, in terms of level of poverty, Nigerians are going through severe poverty crunch, that Nigerian families, households, spend more than 80% of their income on food. So if they are not really in strong position to pay material tax, most households or most taxpayers are only subject to a minimum tax. And then you also look at the companies in the country, they are struggling. I mean, those who are even formalized, they are largely driven by small and medium-scale enterprises that are still struggling to make ends meet. So you have to look at the issue of formalization of the economy. So when you talk of tax, you have to talk of tax within the context of the structure of the economy. And that's where I said I disagree with him, because you can't compare the tax to the GDP revenue of the US, that's a highly formalized economy, to the tax to the GDP the economy that's highly informal and where most of the citizens are living below poverty line.
Okay, I guess Mr. Biggest point is that, debt to GDP ratio has exceeded 50% in the last few years. So in other words, the phrase they use in England, that there's a big hole, a problem of revenue. Now, he says tax. But isn't that the same thing that Taiwo Yedele, who led the Tax and Fiscal Policy Committee set up by President Tinubu, was saying? That committee is saying we will reduce company income tax, but we will increase value-added tax from 7.5% to 10%, beginning from 2025. So will you say that, well, Mr. Bill Gates is not even saying something that is not before us already, that Nigerians need to pay more for the Tinubu government to be able to have revenue?
If you look at Taiwo Oyedele's committee, What he recommended is that the government to bring down corporate tax, but increase value-added tax, but also eliminate or suspend VAT on some essential items like medical equipment, medical supplies, food items, basic necessities. Of course, there are a lot of items that are really tax exempt, VAT exempted, or exempted from VAT. But what he said is that we should expand the VAT exemption list to include other basic services, other basic items that are consumed by households, while we increase the rate to 10% for items that you may call are not absolutely necessary for the survival of households, like the tax they want to impose on sugary or frisky drinks. So that's one aspect. I think I agree with them on that. But the basic thing we should have to bear in mind when we look at Biget's statement that there is a black hole we need to fill. And I was at a program on Friday, and my position is that when you talk of tax, you must first of all develop your economic development plan. When you have a very comprehensive economic development plan, the tax policy will be an integral part of the economic development plan. Most countries at our current level of development have always had very low tax rate policy, so as to attract investors into the economy, and those investors will help us grow the pie. You see, the basic thing you have to look at, I have a small cake, and how do I share that cake? Or how do I grow the pie to a level that even when I impose a low tax rate, I still extract a lot of revenue. Take, for instance, the economy of Nigeria has shrunk to about less than $300 billion. Assuming you even have a tax revenue of 35%, or even 30%, you are going to still have something less than $100 billion as tax revenue. But let's grow the economy to a $1 trillion economy. And you have a 20% tax rate. You're going to have a $200 billion. If you have a 30% tax rate, you have a $300 billion revenue for the government. So the key thing we must focus on is, instead of focusing on let's increase the tax rate, and then, because we also know that at the corporate level or at the microeconomic level, tax is considered as a leakage because it's a burden on the businesses. When you take the tax from the businesses, you reduce the ability to reinvest in their growth plan. So they have to either go and borrow money, or they have to raise new equity from the shareholders. But if you have a low tax rate, the business are able to plow back their profit and expand and create jobs, as well as create more economic activities. So the focus, which I said, that we don't seem to have a well-defined economic development plan. If we have that, we develop a tax plan that is fitted into that economic development plan. And that tax plan should be at our current state of development. What should be our focus? Our focus should be to grow an economy that is manufacturing-based because of our size. We can't be a service-oriented economy because you have a population of over 200 million people to employ. So if you have to be a manufacturing economy, then what do we need to stimulate manufacturing or encourage manufacturing in this economy? You have to look at the basic infrastructure, you have to look at your interest rate, you have to look at your inflation rate, and you have to look at your logistic infrastructure, including the seaports and airports, ability to bring in goods and export goods out of the country. Okay. You have to look at the quality of your labor, so you have to look at your educational system to churn out the right skills. And then when you do all those things, you now say, what kind of tax policy do I have to have? We can borrow a lead from what United Arab Emirates did. For the first more than 20 years of their growth plan, they had zero value-added tax. They had zero personal income tax. They had minimum corporate income tax. And therefore, that stimulated a lot of investment flow into cities like Emirates, like United Arab Emirates, like Dubai. Those investments led to huge investment in infrastructure, huge investment in road infrastructure, real estate, and today they have now implemented a value-added tax, implemented corporate tax, implemented personal income tax, but on a large base. So if you keep on with it, let's increase the tax rate, and then you tax people to death, you are not going to grow the economy. Let's focus on how do we grow the economy? What incentive will we have to give to even the operators in the business that are going through a lot of inclement difficulties to expand their business and employ people, and that larger employment will allow you to tax both the employees in terms of state payee tax and corporate income tax.
I get your point, but finally, and I will need you to be brief, do you think that Mr. Bill Gates was saying that Nigeria's economy stagnated because he came into Nigeria at a time when there was fuel scarcity, long fuel queues everywhere, or it speaks to something far more fundamental. Fuel queues, fuel scarcity. A country that is the sixth largest producer of crude oil in the world cannot even provide common PMS. Could that be part of the stagnation, in your view? I don't know whether you have fuel in your car.
Okay, Dr. Habati, let's look at it, you and I that live in this country. If you had traveled out of the country and you came back to Lagos, let's assume you traveled out in 2018 and you came back to Lagos, can you point to me a new major road that had been built in Lagos? Just Lagos as an example. If you go further and you go to other parts of the country and you drive from here to Benin, the same road you would drive and the same bad road you would drive. If you talk of improvement in power supply, we are still around 4,000 megawatts. So if you talk of unemployment, I still believe, despite the MBS figure, we are still about 33-35% unemployment. If you talk of standard of living, we are deteriorated in terms of standard of living. So you even talk of issue of energy supply, fuel supply, that we are still living with fuel queues. So basic parameters that measure development, fiscal development, we don't seem to have moved an inch. In terms of social development, we are actually retrogressed. You are talking of Mr. Habati or Dr. Habati. 2018, I could drive from Kano to Guzo, leave Kano by this time and go to Guzo and sleep in Guzo and drive back from Guzo back to Kano, leave Guzo by 8 p.m. You do not even afford, you can't afford to do that in the daytime. So in terms of basic social infrastructure, in terms of security, we've also deteriorated. So it is not out of place. We don't need Mr. Bill Gates to tell us that we have stagnated. What he was actually charitable by saying we have stagnated. He could have said you guys have retrogressed. Well, that's the reality of our situation.
I would like to thank you very much, Johnson Chukwu, CEO, Cowrie Asset Management Company Limited, for joining us on This Day Live, the Sunday Talk Show.